You know, the big news item, of course, for over 2 weeks now has been this missing airplane, right? This mysterious disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. And it just kind of amazes me that with all of our technology, you know, all the tracking and surveillance and satellites and all of that, something that large could just go missing. Crazy. And of course, the clues keep trickling out. You know, every day it's like 2 or 3 times a day there's some new headline, right? Some new piece of evidence, some new little bit or piece. And of course, you look at that and, you know, whatever happened, it can't be good, right? And that's also the case when individuals go missing. It's never a good thing. But today, we want to talk about a story of a man who went missing in a good way. His name is Enoch. And he's the next person that we find listed in our study of the heroes of faith in the 11th chapter of the letter to the Hebrews. So I encourage you to take a Bible and turn there with me to Hebrews chapter 11. You know, it tells us that Enoch went missing because God took him. That's all it says. It says that God took him. In other words, Enoch never had to experience death. God just transported him directly to heaven. And you think, well, that's just different. Why would God do such a thing? And what does that have to do with any of us, right? I mean, it's great that he did that for Enoch, but what difference does that make for me? Well, that's what we want to talk about today. So we're going to walk through the story of Enoch. And before we look at Hebrews 11, there are 3 key passages that talk about Enoch. He's in the Bible. He's actually mentioned 5 different times, 5 different places, but 3 of them are particularly important. And so I want to walk through those first. The first one that I want to look at is in the book of Jude. Jude verses 14 through 15. Jude only has 1 chapter, and you find it right there before the book of Revelation. And so I'm going to put these verses from Jude up here on the screen. The author is talking about, in Jude, about people who profess to have faith in God, but live an ungodly life. And he's confronting that. And so Jude 14 says this. It says, "It was also about these that Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones, to execute judgment on all and to convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way." And then it says, "And of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him." So even though Enoch's generation was only the 7th one after the 7th generation of human beings, right? The 7th since creation began. Apparently, by that point, people were already living in a state of open, complete rebellion against God. And so God called Enoch to confront the world. He preached a message of coming judgment. In a way, Enoch was one of the first prophets to receive a revelation from God and to speak it. And so, with that in mind, it just gives you a sense of the day and age in which he lived. It was a very sinful time, very ungodly time. And so, with that in mind, we go back to Genesis chapter 5. It's the second key biblical reference to Enoch. Really the first one in the Bible, Genesis 5. And that passage is a genealogy. And often, I know when we try reading the Bible, that's one of those sections maybe we tend to want to skip over. But we miss the story of Enoch if we do. Now, with those genealogies, some people claim that those are just symbolic, or that maybe generations are left out. But if we just take it at face value and accept the numbers that are given there in Genesis, it suggests to us that those first generations lived as much as 10 times longer than we do today, which is kind of a staggering thought. How could that be? Right? Because the prevailing mindset in our day and age is this evolutionary perspective that says life should keep getting better and better. We're making advances, we think, right? But the biblical perspective is that once Adam and Eve sinned, life began to unravel. And so the biblical perspective is that life keeps getting worse and worse, right? And let's be honest, I mean, when we think of all of the issues, I mean, we have great health care, we have great technology, but we also seem to keep having more and more problems with disease that seem to be getting worse and worse. Right? To me, that fits the biblical picture that we're talking about here. So, plus the other thing is at that time, that was before the flood, which we're going to talk about next week. We'll talk about Noah next week. And so at that time that Enoch lived, the earth's atmosphere was probably significantly different. So that may have contributed to their longer lifespan as well. But getting into this here, Enoch's first mentioned there in Genesis 5, verse 18. Here's what it says. It says, when Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch. Now again, if this genealogy doesn't have any gaps, if we take it strictly, then Enoch was born just 622 years after creation, after God created the earth. And that's early enough that all of the men listed before Enoch in that chapter, in the genealogy, were all still alive. Even Adam. I mean, that's a staggering thought, that he would have known Adam and Eve, possibly. Jumping down to verse 21, we read this. It says, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Now what's interesting is for all the other people in the genealogy, the author just tells us how long they lived after having their first son. But with Enoch, he tells us how long he walked with God. And it stands out. He repeats it. He emphasizes this, that he walked with God. And it seems, the way that that's worded, that perhaps the birth of his son was like a spiritual turning point in Enoch's life. And, I mean, the birth of our children has a way of getting our attention, doesn't it? I mean, it does have this effect of waking you up. And maybe that's what God used to change Enoch's heart. We don't know for sure. But some people think that the name Methuselah was actually prophetic. Because in Hebrew it means something like man of the dart or man of the spear. And so some people think the idea is that it was part of Enoch's prophecy of coming judgment. That Methuselah would live until the end. And in fact, when you go through the genealogy, Methuselah's life ends the year of the flood. It lines right up with that. So the next verse, Genesis 5:24 says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. I mean, it's so brief, right? And there's so many more details we'd like to know about that. I mean, how did it happen? Did he float up in the sky? Did he just disappear? Was it kind of like a Star Trek thing where God beamed him up? I mean, how did this happen? It doesn't tell us. But again, if we take this chronology at face value, we can deduce from back up in verse 23 that this event happened 987 years after creation. Which means that Adam would have already died by that point, but all the other ancestors of Enoch, Seth, Adam's son, and then Enoch's other ancestors, they were all still alive when this happened. People would have known about this situation with Enoch. So the question is, why? Why did God do it? What was so special about Enoch? Now, like I said, he's mentioned in a few other passages. There's other genealogies in 1 Chronicles and in the Gospel of Luke. But the only explanation we find is here in Hebrews chapter 11. That's our third key biblical reference we want to look at. And so follow along with me as we read Hebrews 11, verses 5 through 6. It says, by faith Enoch was taken up, so that he should not see death. And he was not found, because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So basically, God took Enoch because he wanted to spare him from death. Now, he was taken almost 500 years before the flood, so it wasn't that God was just rescuing him from the flood. Enoch could have lived longer if that was the case. And Enoch was relatively young compared to his contemporaries in the genealogy, so it wasn't that he was facing death from natural causes, it doesn't seem. Even though it doesn't say it, I suspect that Enoch's message about God's judgment didn't sit well with people. And so perhaps it was just so convicting that some of those alive at the time were plotting to kill him. I mean, we talked last week about what Cain did to his brother Abel. It's certainly not beyond the scope of possibility here. And so God rescues him. And Hebrews 11 presents his life to us as an example. Well, how does that work? What do we see in Enoch? I think this passage in Hebrews and the other ones that we've already read, they teach us 4 steps to follow in Enoch's path. And the first one is right there, Hebrews 11:5. It's to believe in God. It's to have faith. Right? Because belief or faith in God is a starting point. Right? It's like a compass. It gives us our bearings. It shows us where we're at. It orients us when we're lost. Faith, as this passage describes it, is a determination to accept 2 ideas. They're there at the end of verse 6. Take a look at it again. The first idea, he says there, is it's to believe that God exists. You believe in the existence of God? In Romans 1, Paul talks about God's existence and talks about the evidence for it. In Romans 1:19, he says this. He says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them." And then he says, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the foundation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse." So the idea is that the evidence of God's existence is all around us. It's all there. It's in creation as we look out. And there's this kind of pressing, almost like a constant voice saying, there must be a creator. There must be someone behind this. There must have been someone who started this. There must be a designer. Right? It's too intricate to just have happened to be chance. And so we can choose to ignore that evidence, or we can accept it by faith. So believing in God, first of all, is accepting that idea that God exists. But it's also, going back to verse 6 there, the second idea we have to accept at the end of the verse there is to believe that God rewards those who seek him. I think it's possible to accept God's existence, but then to see him as someone who's angry, as someone who's unforgiving. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we really believe not just in God's existence, but do we believe in his goodness? Do we believe that he desires to bless people? That he desires to bless rather than punish? I mean, isn't that the testimony of the life of Christ? We look at him, we look at what he suffered, that he came, that God sent his son to suffer for our sins. Why? Because he wants to bless us, because he wants to save us. When you think about God, do you think of him as someone who wants to bless? Now, we think about these 2 points, believing in God's existence and believing that he wants to reward people who seek him. Those should be obvious things, right? And you would think, going back to the time of Enoch, that the people in those generations, I mean, being so close to creation, being able to speak with Adam, that this would be obvious to them. And yet it wasn't. Even then, people were rebelling against God. Even then, people were rejecting the idea of trusting in God, of believing in him. So Enoch's faith was unique. It set him apart. Are we following in his path? Are we believing in God? Are we trusting him? The second step that we see in Enoch's path, his way of life, was seeking God. Think of it this way. Faith shows us where we are, but seeking God shows us where we need to go. Right? Believing in God, like I say, is like a compass for the mind. Seeking him is like the destination of our heart, the desire of our heart. And it's there at the end of verse 6. We just read it, that God rewards those who what? Who seek him. Who seek him. Earlier in verse 6, it talks about whoever would draw near to God. I think it's the same idea. Drawing near to him, seeking him. That's what God created us for. That's how he made us to live, to seek after him. Have you ever noticed how so often life seems to fall short of what we desire? I mean, even those things where we think, this is finally going to be what I've wanted. And it never quite measures up. I mean, we want love and acceptance and peace and security, joy and accomplishment, and we pursue those things, and yet we never seem to be fulfilled. And I think that's because God himself is the fulfillment of those desires. We're supposed to seek him. Everything we truly want deep in our heart is found in him, but we don't seek him. Right? In fact, there's a problem. Romans chapter 3, verses 10 through 11, Paul says, as it's written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. So on one hand, God's the answer to everything we need and want, and yet we refuse to see that. We refuse to accept it. We go through life and we keep trying to think of our own answers, our own way to do things. I mean, I think we can believe in God, we can read the Bible, we can go to church, you can even serve in ministry, but it's possible to do it all for our own purposes without ever seeking God. I mean, why are you here this morning? What are you seeking? Is it about God, or is it about you? I think in order for us to truly seek God, he has to change our hearts. Because ultimately, we don't seek him like it says here in Romans, right? Remember, Jesus was the one who came to seek and to save the lost. He has to pursue us. He has to change our heart and turn us back to him. And I think, looking at Enoch's story, I think that's what happened when his son was born. But what will it take for God to get us to seek him? What does he have to do to get our attention? To turn us around? So, when you know where you are, and you know where you need to go, the next question is, how do I get there? And the answer is to walk with God. To walk with God. All right, we move from that determination to believe to the destination of seeking him, to transportation. How you get there. You walk with him. And this is that phrase that was there back in Genesis 5 that stands out there. What does it mean to walk with God? I mean, God's present everywhere, right? He's omnipresent. He is everywhere. So was God literally following Enoch around? Is that what we're talking about? No. The picture, that phrase pictures Enoch going through life with this constant awareness of God. In fact, the Greek translation of the Old Testament kind of helps us out here. The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew, But the Greek translation, when it comes to that passage that talks about Enoch, it doesn't say that he walked with God. It just says he pleased God, which I think is helpful. And then the author of Hebrews draws upon that Greek translation here. Look at it again, the end of verse 5, Hebrews 11:5. He says, now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. See, that was the outcome of his walking with God. And in the beginning of verse 6, without faith, it is impossible to please him. And so walking with God is this moment-by-moment practice of trying to live in such a way that you please God. How do you know what pleases God? It's simple. Read his word. Just read the Bible. I mean, he's given us clear guidance, and a good place to start is the book of Ephesians. Ephesians uses the same idea of walking with God. In chapters 4 and 5, it talks about walking worthy at the beginning of chapter 4. And then in the middle of the chapter, verse 17, it talks about not walking as unbelievers do. Or there it says, some translations say the Gentiles. In chapter 5, it talks about walking in love. And then walking as children of light. And then walking wisely. Right? It's that idea that this desire to please God becomes integrated into the everyday choices and decisions that we make as we go through life. It's not something dramatic. It's not even necessarily something exciting. It's just faithful, day by day, moment by moment, trying to do what pleases God. Right? That's the life of faith, walking with God. And thankfully, God, as New Testament believers, God's given us the Holy Spirit to help us do that, to convict us, to bring the truth to mind, to guide us as we walk with him. Paul even talks about walking by the Spirit, doesn't he, in Galatians 5. One more step that I think we see in Enoch, and this takes us back to that passage we began with in Jude, to speak for God. I mean, if you've been tracking with what I'm saying here, the idea that if you know where you are and you know where you need to go, and you know how to get there, then why not invite someone to go along with you? I don't think God wants us just to think about ourselves when we start with believing that, if we believe that he's a God who rewards those who seek him, then shouldn't we want others to receive that reward? I mean, shouldn't we pick up on God's desire to bless people and want the same, and want to have the same attitude toward people, wanting to see people blessed, wanting to see them seek after him and receive his blessings? If we're walking with God and we know what pleases him, don't you think we should be looking for those opportunities to share that with others? And essentially that's what I think Enoch was doing as he proclaimed God's coming judgment. I go, well, that's kind of a funny way to draw someone along by talking about angels coming in judgment, right? But I think the idea is this. You know, the good news doesn't seem good unless you understand the bad news, right? It's like if I say I have a cure for some sickness, it probably doesn't matter to you unless you know you have that sickness, right? It's the same thing with the gospel. We talk about the gospel and the good news that God provides salvation in Jesus Christ. But if someone doesn't think that they're sinful and they don't think that God's going to hold them accountable for their sin in judgment, then none of that matters. Right? You have to start with the bad news. And so Jude tells us that Enoch was proclaiming that bad news to his generation, the reality of God's coming judgment. Are you willing to speak for God? Are you willing to share the truth with someone? Not just the good news, but the bad news. The bad news that we're all sinners and we've all fallen short. Bad news that God holds us accountable for our sin, that we deserve eternal punishment for our sin. Because it's only in that light that the good news becomes important. It becomes precious. It becomes something to trust in and believe in and treasure and give my life for. So that's what it takes to follow in Enoch's path. It's believing, it's seeking God, it's walking with God, and it's speaking for him. But what about the whole thing about Enoch being taken by God? I mean, does that have any parallel for us? Well, look at these words from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. It says, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first." But then it says, "Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord." So the idea here is that some of us who are Christians will die. We'll experience death, and at some point in the future, Jesus will raise us from the dead. But just like Enoch, some Christians who are alive at that point, when Christ does that, will simply be taken up. Like it says there, they'll be caught up in the clouds to meet him in the air. And those people, whoever they are, they won't have to experience death. So if that event, that resurrection of believers who have died, that catching up, what we sometimes call the rapture, it's the Latin word for being caught up. If that were to happen right now, would you be a part of it? I mean, if you're following the path of Enoch that we've just talked about, you would be. You wouldn't have any concern. If you're believing, if you're seeking God, if you're walking with him, you're speaking for him, then you have confidence that when Christ comes, you'll be ready. So what's your response today to God's word? Maybe, honestly, sometimes we can talk so much about the good news that we lose sight of the bad news. Maybe you need to go back and see that side of God's character again. A good place to do that would be to read Genesis 6 through 8. That's the story of Noah. We're going to be talking about that next week. And to see how God brought judgment upon the world. Maybe a good response today for you would be, maybe if you haven't been seeking God, maybe you have accepted his existence, but the desire of your heart hasn't really been to seek him. Maybe today God's working in your heart and prodding you to turn around, to seek after him. Would you do that today? Would you start seeking God? Maybe the response for you today is to focus on walking with him, on being more alert, more aware, more conscious of seeking to please God in the everyday things of life. Maybe, as we've talked about speaking to someone about God, maybe God's brought someone to your mind that you need to talk with. Whatever response it is that God's placing on your mind, I just encourage you to listen to his word and to obey it, to walk with God.